Alright guys, welcome back to Tony the Technician's channel. So today we're going to be working on installing the roller rockers. Like in my previous video, you saw me install the heads on the block. So that's finally done. Now we're moving on to the roller rockers. It's a pretty simple process, just a little time consuming. Right now I'm going through and I'm actually going through the lifter holes and re-lubing my cam and all of that. And then when we install the lifters and push rods, we will also be using the assembly grease and the assembly lube on both of those. I'll show you how to do that. So you will need assembly lube and then assembly grease. I have this Lucas assembly lube. It's pretty good. I also ordered the red, which I will be using, but this is what I have right now, so that's what I'm using to re-lube, just because I don't want my cam to be dry when I start it. So I'm going through with a straw and I'm putting that in the lifter hole and I'm lubing it. The other thing you'll need are your push rods. If you have bought new ones, then you've obviously done the measurements and you know what length of push rod you need. I am reusing mine and I have it organized, the left head and the right head, and I also have them numbered so I know what order they go in, because when you're reusing lifters and push rods and stuff, you have to put them back in the same order that they came out. So you have to keep very good track of that. The other thing you'll need, of course, are your rockers. These are the rockers I ordered. They're really nice, full rollers, both on the tip and the back. These were $200 for the entire set. It came with the locking nuts and everything. The kit number is SCP-1000. It's 1.5 small block Chevy 3/8 race series rocker arms, set of 16. They're originally close to $300, but I had a $25 certificate for Summit Racing, and it was during the Black Friday week, so I got a little bit more of a discount on those. And then, just like I showed you the push rods, I have my lifters here in the order that they need to line up. I have it marked, you know, this side's the left head, this side's the right head, and such. But other than that, you'll just need your ratchet and your socket. But right now, I'm gonna finish lubing up the engine, which, as you can see, maybe, I have the straw sitting in there just running lube down into the engine. It's not necessary, but my engine's going to be sitting a little while I wait on my transmission to come in, because as soon as I'm done with this engine rebuild, I will be ordering a brand new transmission from Monster Transmission. It's going to be a 700 R4. My car is a manual, but the T5 won't hold up to this 350, and a T56 is really expensive. And I can get the 700 R4 that handles 500 horsepower for half the price as I could get a T56. So even though I really, really want to stick with manual, it's just not in my budget. Maybe later on down the road. I'm not really too sure. I'll probably just stick with the 700 R4 as long as she does good. So I'm going to finish lubing up the engine, and then we'll get to installing these roller rockers. Okay, so just got done putting the assembly lube on my cam and everything. Now we're going to start actually preparing to install the lifters, push rods, and roller rockers. These are full roller, like I stated before, because they actually have roller bearings in these parts of the rocker, unlike like a stamped one that just has like a little metal plate that sits down inside that the stamped rocker kind of wobbles on. These are nice because you don't really have to adjust them all that often like you do a stamped rocker. But as you can see, there's a flat part and a rounded part. You want the flat part facing up, so when you put it in the head, it sits like this. That flat part is what this lock nut is going to sit on. So it's going to sit up against that. So moving on to the lock nut, you have this longer part that you're actually going to tighten down the rocker with. Once you have this finger tight, you're going to take your 5/8 socket or wrench and do 1/2 to 3/4 a turn past hand tight, and then you're going to take your 3/16 Allen and you're going to tighten down this lock nut on top. Once you screw this in, it locks this in place so it doesn't vibrate out or anything like that. It keeps it nice and tight. So, like I stated, you'll need your 3/16 Allen, assembly lube, oil to dip your lifters and roller rockers in. You can either use a wrench, 5/8 to tighten these, or you can use a ratchet. The only bad thing with the ratchet is you can't get in to lock this while holding it in place. So I'm actually using a pass-through socket. If you have this, this comes in very handy. So when you're tightening this down and you get it at your 1/2 turn to 3/4 past hand tight, you can still go in with your Allen key and lock it down. So that's really nice. If you have this, this comes in real handy. So right now I have my lifters sitting in oil just because they're hydraulic lifters. I'm going to go through and make sure my push rods are nice and clean. I also, I can't remember if I stated this or not, but I took a picture since I'm reusing my push rods, since I don't need to change length. I took a picture, but I also took a marker and I wrote where each push rod goes. So I know which order to keep them in, because it is very important to keep the same lifters and push rods in the same spot where you took them out. You're going to be applying the assembly lube to the bottom part of the lifter. This is going to be the part that rides on your camshaft. This top part, the hydraulic, is where your push rod is going to sit in, and then it'll go up to your roller rocker. But like I stated, that's where you will put the assembly lube. You'll make sure that the lifter is completely soaked in oil. You will place them in the same order that you had them, and then we'll move on to installing the push rods. But let me go ahead and show you installing the lifters. So as you can see, I have them in this dish, and I remember this is the left side. I have it marked left. This is all the left side, and then this is the second to last and last lifter. So I'm going to start with these, just because if I move these, it's probably going to fall and I'm going to lose which one goes where. So I'm going to grab the last one, and I'm going to apply assembly lube to the bottom of this. Okay, so I've rolled this lifter in the oil in the bottom of here, and then I've put the assembly lube on the bottom. Now what you're going to do is go over, this is the last one, you're going to slide it right down in. Make sure it slides in easily. There we go. And since these aren't roller lifters, they just go in one way. And you'll do that with all of them, making sure to go in the right order. And that's pretty simple. So I'm going to go ahead and install these lifters, and then we'll get on to installing the push rods. Okay, so I've got all the lifters installed, lubed up with both assembly lube and oil. Now we're going to be moving on to the push rods. This is just for the right head. I have them in order from 1 to 8, 1 starting up front, 8 moving towards the back. But before you install them, you want to take your motor assembly grease and you want to put it on the tips of each of the push rods. One thing you do want to check before installing these is that all of your push rods are clear and aren't gunked up if you're reusing push rods. The numbers I also have on the top, so I know these are the bottoms, these are the tops. It might not matter to some people as long as they're in the right order, but I'm going to do it the exact same way that it came out. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the assembly grease to these push rods, and then we'll get them installed on the block. Okay, so I got the push rods in on this side. If you have your intake manifold on, you can still do this. You just have to feel around to make sure that you have the push rod on the lifter. You might have to use a flashlight. You can look down from the top and kind of see the lifter, but you're just going to put a small dab of assembly grease on top of each one. I tried putting assembly grease on both the top and the bottom and sliding it in, but as you can tell, I rubbed most of it off putting the push rod in. So what I did, I just put the grease on the top, slid one in halfway, put the grease in on the bottom, and then slid it down the rest of the way. And that's it for the push rods. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the other side as well, and then we will move on to actually installing the roller rockers. Okay guys, so I got all the push rods in. Everything's installed. Got assembly grease on the tops and bottoms of all the push rods. So we're good to go there. What I'm about to do now is go along each one of the valve spring covers and just put a dab of assembly grease where the rocker is going to be riding. Just a small dab will do. And you're going to do that for all of them. Once you get that done, you're going to actually start installing the roller rockers. That's the part that takes the time. This all goes by pretty quickly and it's pretty simple. Just make sure you do it in the right order. Like I have these ordered 1 through 8. I have these ordered 9 through 16. So I knew which ones went where and what direction. So now I'm going to finish putting assembly grease on all of the valve springs, and then we'll install the roller rockers. Okay, so everything's prepped, ready for the roller rockers. But before you start installing all the roller rockers, this is just something I do. Some people do it, some people don't. I actually take assembly lube and same stuff that I use on the cam and the bottoms of the lifters is I apply some on each of the push rod rails or whatever you want to call them. They keep them lined up, and I just put a little assembly lube on each one of those. And then I'm also going to take my oil can and I'm just going to squirt a small amount on each push rod, make sure they're nice and lubed up. Then once I'm done with that, I'm going to do the same thing with my roller rocker. I'm going to take my oil squirt gun, I'm going to squirt some oil on each side of this. Basically anything that rolls. You want to get those ball bearings or roller bearings nice and lubed up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and then we'll start putting them on. Okay, so I have oil on all of the bearings on the roller rockers. So basically what you're going to do now is just, I also wipe them down before oiling them because it had a little bit of debris from the packaging. So you might have to wipe them down. But I've applied oil. What you're going to do is make sure that that flat part is up. You're going to bring it over. And you're just going to lay it right there on your push rod and your valve spring. You want to make sure that your roller tip is sitting on the right spot, right in the center. So we have good alignment right there. And you're going to do that with all of them. Once you get them all on, then we can start applying the polylock nuts. Okay, so I've got all the roller rockers installed. Everything is lubed. And this side I have just started the nuts. When you get these, this locking nut in the center will actually be all the way screwed in. So you're gonna have to back all those out so you don't bottom out before you actually tighten the rockers. I haven't done this side yet. Pretty self-explanatory. Make sure you have that backed out. And then just screw it on. When you put these roller rockers on, they do have a little divot in the back for the oil passageway that lines up with the push rod. And you just do that finger tight and just leave it like that. For all of them, you're just gonna go along and do that. So you got all the rockers mounted. So you just keep turning, it stopped right there. Don't try and tighten it or anything. I'm gonna go ahead and finish that side and then we'll move on to actually the process of removing lash. Now, there's a couple ways you can do it. If I didn't have all this mounted already and I was able to access my crankshaft from the front, I could use the center bolt, but I'm not going to. That's a way to turn over the engine in order to remove the lash. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna simply use a pry bar on my flex plate and just turn it that way. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish installing these and then we'll get to it. We've gotten this far. These are the tools that you're gonna need if you're turning it from the flex plate. You'll need your pry bar, your 5/8 socket. I'm using the pass-through like I stated before, and a 3/16 Allen. So the first thing you're gonna do is make sure these aren't tight. They're just on. All the rockers have slack. You can move them up and down, as you can see. The next step will be, I'm gonna start right here. Basically, what you're gonna be doing is you're gonna be turning the engine over until your exhaust port, we're gonna be doing the intake rocker first. So that's this one, since the intake port is right here. This is the exhaust valve because you have your exhaust port. So we're gonna be turning the engine until this spring just starts to compress. As soon as it starts to compress, that is when we can adjust the slack out of this intake rocker. So I'm gonna see if I can set the camera up at a good angle to where you can see. And as soon as we see this start to compress, we'll adjust this. So I'm just gonna go back to the flex plate and I'm gonna start turning the engine over until I see this spring start to compress. Okay. So now that this is starting to compress, you just keep going. There, it's starting to compress. That means we can now adjust the slack out of our intake valve, or our intake rocker, I should say. So now we're gonna take our 5/8 socket, ratchet, and we're just gonna simply place it on. Just gonna turn it until it has no slack. So there you have 0 slack. You back it off just a little bit. There we have slack. Still a little bit of slack. There's 0 slack. So once you get where there is no movement on your intake rocker, you're going to take it and you're going to go 1/2 to 3/4 turn past 0 slap. So there's 3/4 a turn. Now what you're gonna do is you're gonna place it back on here, and now you're going to tighten the center nut, and this is what's gonna lock it in place so it doesn't loosen. You can actually get pretty tight on this thing. You want to make sure it's nice and tight. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my ratchet with the 3/16 Allen head on it, and then I'll go ahead and tighten it down. So I got my T-handle ratchet with the 3/16. You're going to tighten that up quite a bit. There we go. So this one is now done. Locked in, no lash. Now, in order to move on to actually adjusting the exhaust, you are going to compress this intake spring completely, and then as soon as it starts to decompress, coming back up, as soon as it starts to decompress, that is when you're going to adjust your exhaust valve. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see it, but this intake valve is completely compressed, and I had just turned the flex plate until it started to raise. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to do the same thing to this over here. I'm going to remove the lash. So we have some play here. Still got some play. It's okay to have back and forth play, just not up and down. As soon as you have 0 up and down, which I do now, same thing. Go 3/4 a turn, and then you're going to lock this down. So put this back on here, tighten this down, and then make sure it's nice and snug. There we go. Now we have both the intake and the exhaust for cylinder number 1 done. You're going to follow this step all the way through. Just remember, every time the intake valve starts to go down, that's when you're going to adjust your wait, my bad. Every time the exhaust starts to go down, you're going to adjust your intake. And then once you have your intake done and you have your intake completely compressed and it starts to move back up, that is when you do your exhaust. Sorry if that was confusing. I started to confuse myself. But that's how you do it. You'll follow the same sequence, the same process through all of them, and then you'll be good to go. Alright, so we have all of the rocker arms tightened down. So I just want to recap. So here's an exhaust rocker, here's an intake rocker. Lines up with the intake port, lines up with the exhaust port. So when you're adjusting the intake one, what you're looking for is just when the exhaust one starts to go down. As soon as you see the exhaust rocker start to move in the downward position, that means this one is on the base circle of the cam. So that's the one you want to start adjusting. In order to adjust the exhaust side, you're going to keep turning it until the intake opens all the way. So that means this is compressed. And then as soon as it starts to come up, the intake one starts to come up, that's when you're going to adjust your exhaust side. And remember, you're just going to turn this until you have no wobble back and forth, just very lightly. Some of them I had to use my ratchet because I couldn't tighten it with my finger to get the lash out of it. But just turn it until there's no lash up and down. And then you're going to do 1/4 to 3/4 a turn past that. And then you're going to hold it with your wrench or your through socket set. And you're going to tighten down that Allen head. That will lock it in place. But that is all the rockers adjusted. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through, I'm going to keep turning the engine over until every single valve is open. Like, I'm going to open this one, I'm going to go in with my shop vac and get the rest of the stuff out that I couldn't get out when the head was off. Now that I'm able to open the valves, I can get in there and get more of that stuff out, because you want to make sure it's clean. I would have preferred to port the heads with the valves out, but I couldn't. So this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to go through, make sure everything's spotless and good to go. And then next we will be installing the intake manifold, and that'll be here pretty soon. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys have any questions or comments about how to do this, please leave a comment. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Thank you guys.